Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and today we'll be starting to look at a discourse from the Majjhima Nikāya, Sutta number 60, the Apaṇṇaka Sutta. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start reading through the sutta and giving some explanations. And I'll leave a bit of time at the end for questions. However, given the length of this sutta, we'll be doing this in at least two parts. So I won't go through all the sutta today. I'll go through the first portion of it and then finish the rest tomorrow. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. So, as mentioned, this is Majjhima Nikāya number 60, the Apaṇṇaka Sutta. And Apaṇṇaka was translated by Bhante Bodhi as incontrovertible or undeniable, and translated by Bhante Suddhāso as unfailing. So, slightly different translations of the same word, but with a bit of a similar sense to it. Something which is reliable, something which is undeniable, something which won't let you down. So in this sutta, as we go through it, for those who are familiar with the Kalama Sutta, there's some resemblance to that discourse, but this one is a much longer and more thorough treatment of a similar subject. So the discourse begins, and I'm reading here mostly from Bhante Suddhāso's translation, but I may also sometimes reference Bhante Bodhi's translation, and I may also alter the phrasing of things as we go along based on the Pali text. And when necessary, I'll also explain what the Pali is saying to make it a bit more clear. So the discourse begins. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha was wandering in the land of the Kosalans, together with a large sangha of mendicants, when he arrived at the village of the Kosalan Brahmins named Sala. So this is actually a very common opening for the discourses, is with the Buddha wandering around with a group of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which is not surprising because the Buddha himself was a wandering monk, and he spent most of his life wandering, and his own close disciples were themselves also wandering monks who spent much of their time either going around with the Buddha or doing their own wandering practice or doing their own meditation practice in various places around northern India. But much of their time was spent wandering from place to place. So on this occasion, the Buddha is wandering around with a large group of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and it comes to the town of Sala, and the discourse continues. It says, the Brahmins and householders of Sala heard, it seems the contemplative Gotama, a Sakyan gone forth from a Sakyan family, wandering in the land of the Kosalans, has arrived at Sala, together with a large sangha of mendicants. He has this good reputation. That blessed one is an arhat, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened and blessed. So that's a translation of the standard recollection of the Buddha, Itipiso Bhagava Arahang, etc. So the 9 qualities of the Buddha that in monasteries this is commonly recited every day. So the people of this village had already heard about the Buddha, had already heard that he was fully awakened and that he had these marvelous qualities. And continues, they say a bit more about the Buddha's reputation. They say, he has realized with his own insight this world, with its gods, maras, and divinities, this population with its contemplatives and Brahmins, gods and humans, and he makes it known to others. He proclaims a teaching that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, meaningful and well phrased. And he reveals a spiritual practice that's entirely full and pure. It is good to see such arhats. So this is also a fairly common opening in the suttas. As the Buddha began teaching the Dhamma and wandering around northern India, a reputation began to spread about him. So people started to share the news that there was this incredible spiritual teacher, this person of incredible conduct, of incredible wisdom, who was going around teaching a spiritual practice which was incredibly effective, and which was teaching a doctrine, a system of understanding which was extremely well developed. It was very thorough and precise. So often when the Buddha would go to a place, the people there had already heard about him and were interested in meeting him and seeing what he had to say. So that was what happened on this occasion. So the sutta continues. Then the Brahmins and householders of Sala went to the Buddha. Before sitting down to one side, some bowed, some exchanged greetings and polite conversation, some held up their joined palms towards the Buddha. That means they made Anjali towards the Buddha. Some announced their name and clan, while some kept silent. The Buddha said to them, "So, householders, is there any teacher you're happy with, in whom you have acquired grounded faith?" And they reply, "No, Bhante." And I find this quite cute as a start for the conversation. So these people go to visit the Buddha. Some of them paid respects and some did not. So this also indicates that these were people who had mixed opinions about the Buddha. Maybe some of them were inclined towards trust in the Buddha, and others were still quite doubtful or skeptical. But based on the way people approached, the sense you get is that none of them were yet followers of the Buddha. They were merely people with some curiosity about the Buddha. And this is confirmed in that the first thing the Buddha asks is, do you have a spiritual teacher? Do you have a teacher that you're content with, that you have faith in? And the people replied, no, we don't. And so then the Buddha gives them an instruction. He says, since you haven't found a teacher you're happy with, you should undertake and implement this unfailing teaching. So that's Apaṇṇaka Dhamma, the unfailing Dhamma or incontrovertible Dhamma. And he says, for when this unfailing teaching is undertaken, it will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. And what is the unfailing teaching? What is the Apaṇṇaka Dhamma, the incontrovertible Dhamma? Undeniable Dhamma. And so what's next going to happen is the Buddha is going to go through a number of examples of beliefs which were common at that time in India, and which were in contradiction to the Buddha's own teachings. So he's going to describe these different belief systems, these different worldviews, and then he's going to explain why that's not an appropriate way of relating to the world. So the first one, he says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. There is no meaning in giving, sacrifice, or offerings. There is no fruit or result of good and bad karma. There is no afterlife. There is no such thing as mother and father. There are no beings that are reborn spontaneously. There are no contemplatives or Brahmins who have the right path and who have practiced correctly and who teach the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. So I'm just going to break a little bit of the Pali down here because I don't completely agree with the translation here. So nati dinnang, so there's nothing given. So this is saying that there's no value in generosity. Nati yitang, there's nothing sacrificed. Nati hutang, nothing offered. So again, this person is saying that there's no value in practicing generosity. There's no point in practicing generosity. Nati sukhada dukkhatanang kamanang palang vipako. So there's no result or effect to either good karma or bad karma. So whether you do good things or evil things doesn't matter. It has no effect. Nati ayang loko, nati paroloko. So there's no this world and next world. So denying life after death, denying the idea of afterlife of any sort. Nati mata, nati pita. There's no mother and no father. So this is denying the idea that there's any kind of special relationship or responsibility or commitment or anything within the family. So saying that there's no point in respecting your parents, there's no point in caring for your parents, they're no different than anybody else. Saying nati satta upapatika, there are no beings reborn spontaneously. So this is denying the existence of spirits or celestial beings or ghosts or devas or anything non-physical, any of the non-physical beings which the Buddha speaks about. Nati loke samana brahmana, so there's no contemplatives or brahmins, so no spiritual practitioners. Sammagita, who have the right path, the right way of practicing. Samma patipanna, who are practicing correctly or appropriately. So they're denying the existence of good spiritual practitioners in the world, saying there's nobody who has a valid spiritual practice. And yeya mancha lokang parancha lokang sayang binyasa chikatva pavedenti. So, and saying that there's nobody who understands both this world and other worlds and is able to explain them, is able to teach about them. This is already very interesting because one thing which people will sometimes say in an effort to refute the Buddhist teachings on karma and rebirth is they'll say that, oh well, in ancient India, everyone believed in karma and rebirth. It was a standard feature of everyone's cultural and religious beliefs, so the Buddha was just copying what everybody else was saying. You'll sometimes hear this from people who want to delete karma and rebirth from the Buddhist teachings. But this is actually not historically true. So in ancient India, as nowadays, there were many people who did not believe in karma. There were many people who did not believe in rebirth. There were many people who believed that there was only this life and nothing else, and that there was no point in worrying about good or bad karma because there was no such thing as karma. There was no point in worrying about your next life because there wasn't going to be one. So this is nothing new. It was something which people were already putting forward as a belief system 2,500 years ago during the time of the Buddha, which is why the Buddha is bringing it up here for the sake of discussion, saying, yeah, there are people who believe there's no such thing as karma and rebirth. There are people who believe that there's no point in practicing generosity or morality. There are people who believe that it's impossible to have direct knowledge of this life and the next life. But of course the Buddha has a different take on things, a different way of relating to things. So carrying on with the sutta, and the Buddha says, and there are some contemplatives and Brahmins whose doctrine directly contradicts this. They say, there is meaning in giving sacrifice and offerings, there are fruits and results of good and bad karma, there is an afterlife, there are such things as mother and father and beings that are reborn spontaneously, and there are contemplatives and Brahmins who have the right path and practice correctly, and who describe this life and the next life after realizing it with their own insight. So in other words, the exact opposite. So people who do teach generosity and morality, karma and rebirth, who say that there are spiritual practitioners who know a way of practicing which leads to direct understanding of the nature of reality. So then the Buddha asks the lay people, he says, what do you think, householders? Don't these doctrines directly contradict each other? And they reply, yes, Bhante. And the Buddha continues. He says, this being so, consider those contemplatives and Brahmins whose view is that there is no meaning in giving, etc. So the first case, the people who reject the value of generosity, morality, who reject karma and rebirth, who reject family responsibility, who reject the possibility of spiritual practitioners who directly realize the nature of reality and so on. He says, regarding those people, the Buddha says, you can expect that they will reject good conduct by way of body, speech, and mind, and they will undertake and implement bad conduct by way of body, speech, and mind. Why is that? Because those contemplatives and Brahmins don't see that unwholesome qualities are full of drawbacks, sordidness, disadvantages, or corruption. So drawbacks, disadvantages, and corruption, or that wholesome qualities have the benefit and cleansing of renunciation. This is a bit of an odd translation here. I want to see how Bhante Bodhi handled this. So Bhante Bodhi translated this as, because those good contemplatives and Brahmins do not see in unwholesome states the danger, degradation, and defilement, nor do they see in wholesome states the blessing of renunciation and the aspect of cleansing. So similar meaning, but slightly different. So what the Buddha is pointing out here is that somebody who doesn't believe in karma and rebirth, someone who doesn't see the value of generosity and morality, and who doesn't believe in effective spiritual practice, then it's actually quite natural that they'll be disinclined to live a moral life. They'll be disinclined to cultivate wholesome qualities, and that it's very likely that they'll be attracted to unwholesome behaviors, to cultivating harmful and evil tendencies of mind. So tendencies based upon greed, hatred, and delusion. So again, if you think there's no karma, well, then you'll just do whatever you can get away with. Whatever won't get you in trouble in this life is good enough. If you don't believe there's a next life, then you don't need to worry about it. You just try to suck as much pleasure as you can out of this one, no matter what harmful effect it has on others or might have on the future. So we can actually see this. So people who don't believe in karma and rebirth, who don't believe in the value of generosity and morality, then tend to do really evil things. They tend to make really awful choices in life. So then the Buddha continues. He says, moreover, since there actually is another world, their view that there is no other world is wrong view. Since there actually is another world, their thought that there is no other world is wrong thought. So this is miccha ditti, miccha sankappa. Since there actually is another world, their speech that there is no other world is wrong speech, miccha vacha. Since there actually is another world, in saying that there is no other world, they contradict those arhants who know the other world. Since there actually is another world, in convincing another that there is no other world, they are convincing them to accept an untrue teaching. And on account of that, they glorify themselves and put others down. So they give up their formal ethical conduct and are established in unethical conduct. Their formal moral behavior and establish themselves in immoral behavior. And the Buddha continues, he says, and that is how these many harmful, unwholesome qualities come to be, with wrong view as condition. Wrong view, wrong thought, wrong speech, contradicting the noble ones, convincing others to accept untrue teachings, and glorifying oneself and putting others down. So again, this is something which can be noted. So again, we don't need to look all the way back to the time of the Buddha. We can actually see this happening nowadays. So people who take on the view that there's no such thing as karma and rebirth, and convinced of this, then they start trying to convince other people of the same. They start trying to convince other people that Buddhism doesn't teach karma and rebirth, that it's not a necessary element of the Dhamma, glorifying their own view and denigrating traditional Buddhism as being out of date or superstitious. And then this leads to generating further bad karma. So cultivating wrong view, cultivating actions and speech based upon wrong view, the mind becomes deeper and deeper immersed in suffering. So the Buddha continues in the sutta. He says, a sensible person reflects on this matter in this way. So reflecting on the question of karma and rebirth, of morality and immorality, generosity and stinginess, and so on. He says, a sensible person reflects in this way. If there is no other world, when this individual's body breaks up, they will remain safe. So in other words, if there's no rebirth, then when you die, you have nothing to worry about. There's no afterlife, well, no problem. You have no need to fear death, no problem. But it continues, the person reflects, if there is another world, then when they're separated from their body after death, they will be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, an underworld, or in hell. So in other words, if one engages in immoral behavior, well, if there's no afterlife, then okay, no problem, you're fine. But if there is an afterlife, if there is such a thing as karma and rebirth, then one will experience the harmful consequences of one's bad deeds. And that can lead to rebirth in extremely unpleasant conditions or even in hell realms. And the sensible person continues by saying, but let us grant that those who say there is no other world are correct. So in other words, let's pretend for a moment that the people who reject karma and rebirth, let's pretend they're right. The contemplation continues. Regardless, that individual is still criticized by sensible people in this very life as being an immoral individual of wrong view, a nihilist. So in other words, even if they're right that there's no afterlife, then somebody who lacks morality, who lacks a sense of good conduct, of decency, of generosity, will still tend to draw criticism in this life. So the good people of this world will still have a negative opinion or negative attitude towards immoral people. So it still makes this life less comfortable, less pleasant. And the sensible person continues, but if there really is another world, they hold a losing hand on both counts. In other words, they're losing both in this life because of generating a bad reputation for themselves, and also they lose in the next life. So they've lost in both ways. And it says, for they are criticized by sensible people in this very life, and when they're separated from their body after death, they will be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, in hell. They have wrongly undertaken this unfailing teaching in such a way that it encompasses the positive outcomes of one side only, leaving out the wholesome premise. So, in other words, encompasses the positive outcomes of one side only. It's saying that somebody who takes the view of YOLO, you only live once, and then commits to living a life without the principles of morality, without guided by wisdom, without guided by spiritual foundation. They're trying to get maybe more pleasure out of this life. So in that sense, they're embracing one side of positivity. But in so doing, they're not only making this life less pleasant, less comfortable, but they're also creating the conditions for a miserable afterlife, for unpleasant conditions in future lives. So this is what it's meant by encompassing the positive outcomes of one side only. It's focusing only on the immediate present. It's not paying attention to the potential harmful consequences in the future. A further effect of this, which it's not mentioned in this sutta, but it is mentioned in other suttas where this topic is also addressed, is also that a person who engages in immoral conduct in this life also experiences the suffering of remorse, the suffering of self-criticism, of self-blame. They also experience the suffering that comes from a guilty conscience. So in addition to drawing criticism and blame and possibly even legal consequences from the rest of society, there's also the internal suffering of knowing one's own harmful deeds, the inner torment that comes from knowing that one is doing harmful things in the world. So again, this is pointing out that the person who's committed to moral conduct, so kindness and generosity, based on the premise of karma and rebirth, that will both lead to a happier life here and now, but also create the conditions for a happier future life if there is one. So this is one iteration of what's sometimes called the Buddhist version of Pascal's wager. So Pascal's wager was from a theologian, if I recall correctly. Pascal, was he a theologian or logician? Actually, don't remember.
He was arguing for being Christian.
Yeah. So as I recall, Pascal was a theologian who basically he said, if you believe in God and there isn't one, well, no big deal. You haven't lost anything. But if you don't believe in God and there is one, then after death you're in for a bad time. So he's like, well, you might as well just choose to believe in God, because either way you'll be okay. Well, this is basically the Buddhist version of that. It's like, well, if you believe in karma and rebirth, then you'll be happier in this life and in the next one. If you don't believe in karma and rebirth, then you'll have a harder time both in this life and in the next one. So it's a similar logical application. So the person continues. So considering the other side, it says, consider those contemplatives and Brahmins whose view is that there is meaning in generosity and so on. So the people who do believe in karma and rebirth and in the existence of spiritual practice. It says, you can expect that they will reject bad conduct by way of body, speech, and mind, and they will undertake and implement good conduct by way of body, speech, and mind. Naturally. It says, why is that? Because those contemplatives and Brahmins see that unwholesome qualities are full of drawbacks, disadvantages, and corruption, and that wholesome qualities have the benefit and cleansing power of renunciation. Moreover, since there actually is another world, their view that there is another world is right view. Since there actually is another world, their thought that there is another world is right thought. Since there actually is another world, their speech that there is another world is right speech. Since there actually is another world, and saying that there is another world, they don't contradict those arhants who know the other world. Since there actually is another world, in convincing another that there is another world, they're convincing them to accept a true teaching. And on account of that, they don't glorify themselves or put others down. So this is an important point. So this is describing the good conduct of someone who believes in karma and rebirth and the value of generosity and morality and spiritual practice. So it's saying that they do, based on that belief, on that viewpoint, they do commit themselves to moral behavior by body, speech, and mind. They do commit themselves to taking on right view, right thought, right speech, and so on. But they do not use that as a basis to praise themselves or put down others. So this is one error which we can easily fall into. We can easily fall into the error of arrogance, of thinking, oh, I have right view, unlike those other peasants. It's like, oh, I have the right spiritual practice, not like those heathens. I know the good way of practicing, not like all those deluded fools. It's very easy to fall into arrogance. So especially as one starts to make progress in one's practice and understanding of Buddhism. It's easy to start to think that we're better than others, or that we're more advanced than others. But the irony is that the more we think we're better than others, the more we're falling away from the true path. Because the true path of the Buddha's teachings is one of discarding self-centeredness. It's a path of humility. It's a path of eroding our self-centeredness, discarding this fixation on me, this self-centeredness, which is at the root of all of our suffering. So if we use Buddhist practice itself as an excuse for building up our ego, building up our self-centeredness, and cultivating arrogance, then we're actually undermining the purpose of the Dhamma. So the purpose of the Dhamma is to eliminate our self-centeredness, not to build it up. So someone who correctly understands the Dhamma will not use that as a basis to put themselves up and put others down. So they'll be cultivating humility rather than arrogance. And it continues, it says, they give up their former immoral conduct and are established in moral conduct. And this is how the many wholesome qualities come to be, with right view as condition, right view, right thought, right speech, not contradicting the noble ones, convincing others to accept true teachings, and not glorifying oneself or putting others down. And it continues, a sensible person reflects in this way. If there is another world, then when this person is separated from their body after death, they will be reborn in a good place, in a heavenly realm. But let us grant that those who say that there is no other world are correct. Regardless, that individual is still praised by sensible people in this very life as being a moral person of right view, who affirms a positive teaching. So if there really is another world, then they hold a perfect hand on both counts. For they are praised by sensible people in this very life. And after death, when they're separated from their body, they will be reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm. They have rightly undertaken this unfailing teaching in such a way that it encompasses the positive outcomes of both sides, leaving out the unwholesome premise. So this completes the first wrong view, which has been addressed. So here again, it's pointing out that somebody who does take on the view of karma and rebirth will then naturally tend to commit themselves to wholesome behavior. They'll commit themselves to kindness and generosity. They'll commit themselves to self-restraint. They'll commit themselves to spiritual practice. And in so doing, they'll both have a more pleasant and enjoyable life here and now, with a purer mind, a happy mind, a peaceful mind. They'll also be appreciated by the other good people of the world, the other wise people of the world. And if there actually is an afterlife, then they're bound to have a good one, because of cultivating good karma in this life. So thus it said that they have a perfect hand on both counts. Or they've embraced the positive outcomes of both sides. So this is saying both the side of this life, and that one is having a more happy and peaceful life here and now because of one's moral conduct and right view. And also, if there is an afterlife, then one will have a good one because of creating the necessary conditions for a good afterlife. So in this way, one has won in both ways. One is successful in both ways. Then the second wrong view, this one is similar. So the second wrong view that the Buddha presents, he says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. The one who acts does nothing wrong when they punish, mutilate, torture, aggrieve, oppress, intimidate, or encourage others to do the same. They do nothing wrong when they kill, steal, rob, plunder, pillage, commit highway robbery, commit adultery, and tell lies. And as if that wasn't enough detail, it goes into more detail. It says, even if one were to reduce all the living creatures of this earth to one heap and mass of flesh with a razor-edged wheel, no evil comes of that, and no result of evil. If you were to go along the bank of the Ganges River, killing, mutilating, and torturing, and encouraging others to do the same, no evil comes of that, and no result of evil. If you were to go along the north bank of the Ganges, giving and sacrificing and encouraging others to do the same, no merit comes of that, and no outcome of merit. In giving, self-control, restraint, and truthfulness, there is no merit or outcome of merit. So this is still similar to the previous one. So rather than focusing particularly on the aspect of rebirth or future lives, this is just focusing in on the concept of karma. So this is a person who's saying there's no such thing as good and evil. You can do whatever you want, and it doesn't matter. So whether you're killing and torturing or whether you're taking care of others and practicing generosity, it's all the same. No problem either way. It doesn't matter at all. So again, this is the concept that there's no such thing as morality. You can do whatever you want with your life and it doesn't matter at all. And of course the Buddha says, and there are others who teach the opposite. So teaching that, of course, mutilating and torturing and killing and stealing and so on is in fact bad karma. And giving and self-control and restraint and truthfulness and such is in fact good karma, it's merit. So again, the Buddha says, don't these doctrines directly contradict each other? And the householders confirm, yes, Bhante. And so the Buddha again says, he says, regarding the people who say there's nothing wrong with killing and torturing and stealing and so on, you can expect that they will reject good conduct and undertake bad conduct. So he gives the same analysis as for the previous wrong view. And then correspondingly, he says, then a sensible person reflects in this way. If there is no effective action, so in other words, if there's no such thing as karma, then when this person is separated from their body, they will still be safe. In other words, they have nothing to fear from the next life. But if there is effective action, so if there is karma, then when they're separated from their body after death, they will be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, in hell. So again, the same analysis as before. So if one rejects the concept of good and evil, well, you don't have to worry about the next life, assuming there isn't one. But if there actually is another life, if there actually is karma and rebirth, then one is going to a bad destination. Things are not going to go well. So again, the Buddha applies the same reflection as to the previous example. So again, not dramatically different. It's just focusing on the karma aspect of the wrong view. Then the next one, the next wrong view that the Buddha speaks about, so this is another permutation on the same concept. This is someone who says, there is no cause or reason for the corruption of sentient beings. Sentient beings are corrupted without cause or reason. There is no cause or reason for the purification of sentient beings. Sentient beings are purified without cause or reason. There is no power, no energy, no human strength or vigor. All sentient beings, all living creatures, all beings, all souls lack control, power, and energy. Molded by destiny, circumstance, and nature, they experience pleasure and pain in the 6 classes of rebirth. So this was another example of a wrong view that was common at that time in India, where the Buddha was living and teaching. So this was someone who did actually believe in rebirth, but did not believe in karma. So this was someone who actually believed that there was no free will at all. That all free will and choice is an illusion, that we're just constantly observing the playing out of events which we have no control over. So it says there's no power, no energy, no strength, no vigor, no control. So in other words, we have absolutely no ability to control the flow of events. We're just watching as we go through the illusion of control, the illusion of making choices. So this was someone who believed in rebirth, but not in karma, not in the ability to make choices or decisions in life. So one who rejected free will. And of course, the Buddha said there are others who teach the opposite, who teach that there is a cause and reason for the corruption of sentient beings. There is a cause and reason for the purification of sentient beings. In other words, we actually can make choices which will lead to our mind becoming either increasingly corrupted or increasingly pure. There is a way of purifying our mind through dedicated practice. So again, the right view side of this is saying there is power, energy, human strength, and vigor. It is not the case that all beings lack control, power, and energy, or that it's only by destiny, circumstance, and nature that one goes through the rounds of rebirth. So this opposite view, once again, is saying that there actually is choice. There actually is free will in the sense of making decisions which have consequences. And that we're experiencing the consequences of our past choices. So we can now make choices which will lead either towards more purity, more wisdom, or towards more corruption and delusion. Again, the Buddha says, don't these doctrines contradict each other? And then he applies the same analysis. So the person who believes that there's no such thing as free will, no such thing as choice and decision, won't they naturally then tend to reject good conduct and fall into bad conduct? And actually, one way of understanding this is because if one thinks that there's no power of choice, then one will tend to fall back on one's instincts and impulses. If you think there's no power of choice, no free will, then you won't try to exert free will. You won't try to exert control over your choices and decisions. You won't try to exert self-restraint because it will be pointless. It would seem irrelevant or unnecessary. So then what does one go by? One goes by instincts and impulses. The problem is that our instincts and impulses are mostly based in defilements and delusion. So someone who just goes by their instincts and impulses all the time will have a tendency to become increasingly corrupted, increasingly confused, increasingly animalistic. They'll naturally fall downwards in the realm of rebirth. They'll naturally devolve into more miserable states of being. So again, the Buddha applies the same analysis here. Since there is causality, their view that there is no causality is wrong view, and so on. And then the opposite one, so he says the sensible person then reflects, if there is no causality, then after death this person will still be safe. But if there is causality, then after death they'll be reborn in a bad place. So again, applying the same analysis here, the same analysis that if one takes on the view that there's no such thing as free will, no such thing as choice and decision, then one will naturally veer towards unpleasant rebirth. One will tend to devolve in one's morality and wisdom, and therefore fall into the lower realms. And again, he says, those who do take on the view that there is causality, then they will tend to reject immoral conduct and commit themselves to moral conduct, to good conduct. So again, the same analysis as with the previous two examples of wrong view and right view. So I think I'll go ahead and pause at this point, and I have the intention to go through the rest of the sutta tomorrow. So at this point I've gone through about half of the discourse, and we can intend to resume the rest tomorrow. So for now we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, and I see that several people have checked in online and made some comments. So hello to John, Mike, Christina, Julie, Wasabi-chan, Maria, Kumu, Jayanta, Bhumika, Lydia, Olga, Richard, HPD, Joram, Michael, JD, and Antihero, and everybody else who is watching. So let's see if there's any questions here. So Richard says, I think that the Buddha to be was a once returner, and then he was perfect in view and in conduct, Sakayaditthi and Silabhata Paramasa. So why did he practice asceticism for 6 years? He should have given it up immediately. Well, the thing is that the Buddha to be was not born as a once returner. It's actually quite clearly stated in the suttas that although he had been practicing for hundreds of lifetimes, in fact, and he had cultivated many excellent spiritual qualities, he had not yet perfected his spiritual practices to the point of attaining even the first stage of awakening. So at the time when the Bodhisattva decided to leave behind lay life and become a spiritual contemplative, at that time he did not have even the first stage of awakening. So he was not even a stream enterer, let alone anything further along. So he had to learn everything from zero. So he had a very strong tendency towards morality and right view and so on, cultivated from previous lifetimes, but he had not yet perfected those qualities of right view to the point where he would be even a stream enterer. So he had to figure it out. And since he didn't have any Buddhist teacher, he had to figure it out on his own. And in the course of trying to figure out how to practice correctly, he did take on some of the teachings that were available at the time, but those teachings were not relevant to the Buddhist path, and therefore he eventually gave them up. He eventually decided that those ascetic practices were not helpful. But part of how he came to that realization was through trying them out and seeing for himself that they weren't actually purifying his mind. They weren't actually leading to true wisdom. So this is why the Buddha went through a period of asceticism. Again, it was what was being taught at the time as spiritual practice. So he gave it a try and eventually saw that it wasn't working and he needed to do something else. And that was when he started investigating his own mind more closely and eventually discovered the Noble Eightfold Path. HPD says, can you please comment on what filial piety? So it's not actually gone into in detail in this particular sutta. What we do see mentioned elsewhere in the suttas is that we do have a debt of gratitude towards our parents. So no matter how good or bad our parents were, just the mere fact that they're our parents means that we already should be grateful for the fact that they've given us a body. They've given us a human body which we can use to practice the Dhamma. That's already something amazing, something to be grateful for. And most people have a lot to be grateful for when thinking about their parents. Again, there are some people who really did have really awful parents, but most people, there's at least a few good things your parents have done. And probably when you sit down and start thinking of all the good things your parents have done for you, you might find it's actually quite a long list. And this is a great practice to do, because by the end of making a list of all the good things your parents have done for you, you'll probably have a lot of gratitude for your parents. And that's a very good thing. Also in the Mangala Sutta, the Buddha says that one of the greatest blessings in our life is to take care of our parents. So when we have an opportunity to go do good things for our parents or to help out our parents, we should see it as a blessing to have that opportunity. Not as a burden or not as something to avoid, but as a blessing in our life, the opportunity to help out our parents. So it looks like Joram made a long series of remarks which I don't understand at all. Like, this isn't making any sense to me, so I'm just going to skip past it. Let's see, Richard says, about the view of there is mother and father, it refers that we as their sons must repay them by stabilizing them in morality, faith, wisdom, and generosity. But in many cases, if not in all, that's almost impossible to do directly. Would be enough by oneself as a son to undertake those qualities without involvement because they're not interested at all. So this is a difficult situation. So yes, the Buddha did say that the best way to repay the kindness of our parents is, if they lack morality, help them cultivate morality. If they lack faith, help them cultivate faith. If they lack wisdom, help them cultivate wisdom. So you do the best you can, but if your parents are really genuinely uninterested, then often the best you can do is just by modeling those qualities in your own life and hope that that will get through to them at some point. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go home to your parents and pull out your Majjhima Nikāya and be like, have you heard the good word of the Buddha? Let me teach you about the Buddha. There's a chance that might work. It might. But odds are it won't. On the other hand, what tends to really get through to people is when you practice the Dhamma thoroughly and well. When you transform your own heart. When they look at you and they think, oh, Richard used to be kind of selfish and mean, but now Richard is very kind and generous. That's interesting. Richard used to be kind of depressed and agitated, but now Richard is happy and peaceful. That's interesting. I wonder why that is. So they might just appreciate that you've cultivated these good qualities, and they might also start to investigate why. What is it that's helped you to transform yourself in this positive way? So that's often what really gets through to our loved ones. It's not necessarily attempts to convert them logically, but just modeling the goodness of the Dhamma. Then they tend to appreciate that goodness. And that's sufficient. So you'll notice here that the Buddha is not necessarily saying that you need to convert your parents to Buddhism. He's just saying if they lack morality, help them cultivate morality. If they lack generosity, help them cultivate generosity. If they lack wisdom, help them cultivate wisdom. So it's more about seeing, what can I do in order to help my people, help my parents be better people? Help them cultivate these basic principles of goodness, which are almost universal in major world religions. Pretty much every major religion has taught generosity and kindness and basic moral principles of these sorts. So they're not even uniquely Buddhist things. They're universally recognized as basic principles of human goodness. There's even the concept of secular morality, secular ethics, of people who teach morality from a completely non-religious standpoint. And also those people say that, yeah, kindness and generosity are fundamentally good things. So these are basically universally accepted principles of goodness. So helping your parents improve in these basic qualities of goodness doesn't necessarily mean trying to convert them to Buddhism. It just means helping them cultivate their moral foundation in whatever way you can, whatever is actually relevant. And yeah, often the best way is just to model it yourself and hope that others will notice and start catching on. Okay. So J.D. Smith says, so the Pali mentions souls. Does the sutta mention a soul? So in talking about the various views that other people held at that time, then the Buddha would use their own terminology. So let me check and see what word is actually translated as souls. So the word that's translated as soul in Pali, it's actually jiva. And jiva more literally just means life. So that doesn't even necessarily need to be translated as souls. It could just be translated as life forms, all life forms, which might be an easier way of handling it. So it's a little bit awkward to insert the word soul here, precisely because it then creates confusion and misunderstanding. Because, of course, the concept of soul, as it's commonly understood, doesn't quite fit into Buddhist thought. So I wouldn't actually say that the sutta is talking about souls. I would rather just say that this sutta, again, is talking about various forms of wrong view. These first three are about rejecting karma and rebirth. So somebody talking about beings going through rebirth but without karma. Again, one of the words they used in talking about these living beings is jiva. And jiva, in some contexts, it might be reasonable to translate it as soul. In this context, I think life form is sufficient. Again, jiva just means life. But even if it did mean soul, again, the Buddha here is just repeating the words of other people's wrong views. So even if the Buddha is using the word soul, that's not his own way of talking about reality. He's just copying, he's just saying what other people were saying. So HPD says, can you recommend meditation for purifying the mind and making wise choices? Actually, I recommend reading the suttas. So you can meditate all day long, but if you don't have right view, you're mostly wasting your time. Right view comes first. The Buddha said right view is the forerunner of all wholesome states. So without right view, you can spend all day long sitting on your cushion staring into space and you will not get one step closer to enlightenment. So right view is necessary if you want to have effective meditation practice. So read the suttas, listen to Dhamma talks, read Dhamma books, listen to talks by Buddhist monks, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, read books by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, read the suttas, the discourses of the Buddha. And this will help tremendously in cultivating wisdom. As for making wise choices, ultimately it always comes down to the principles of kindness and renunciation. If you base all of your choices on kindness and renunciation, then you will unerringly move towards awakening. Okay, and Michael says, if a person cultivates the Eightfold Path through various practices each day, can they live by instinct or do they risk corruption? As in, can correct life be buoyed into place so one isn't checking? Yes, once you're a stream enterer, but not before. Not before. And even stream enterers can still make occasional mild moral errors because also their wisdom is not yet completely perfect and their morality is not yet completely perfect. But it is sufficiently developed to the point where they unerringly move towards awakening. But prior to stream entry, it is risky to live by instinct because your instincts will always be tainted to some degree by unwholesome tendencies of mind. So prior to stream entry, which means 99.999% of Buddhists in the world, most likely including you, Michael, with all due respect, prior to stream entry, we have to put a really conscious effort into practicing morality, conscious effort into practicing kindness and self-restraint, practicing renunciation and contentment, conscious effort into practicing mindfulness and clear awareness at all times. Because otherwise the mind will slip back in its bad habits. So we need to watch out for that. It happens very quickly and very easily. But as you continue practicing, it does get easier. As you build up good habits, moral habits, wise habits, then those do start to become stronger in the mind and it gets easier. In some ways, the early stages of practice are the most difficult because that's when our bad habits are still dominating the mind. As we continue practicing, then our good habits become stronger and stronger. And that gives us the strength to keep going forward. So it tends to feel a bit like being buoyed up, as you say. Like as you build up wholesome qualities in your mind, and it gives a sense of lightness and ease, and a motivation to keep moving forward in the spiritual path. So it can start to feel easier as you continue. And that's the last of the questions online. You have a question? Yeah, what's your question?
I've heard him, I remember hearing a monk say something about one of these views, and I was wanted to ask for clarification. So he said that, gave the sense that he had the view that there was no choices.
Mm.
He said those choices are, they're, I can't remember exactly what he said. He said that those choices are conditioned. So even if you think you're making a choice, there's still causes and conditions that went into making that choice. I remember him talking about that, and I was wondering if that's, is he falling into the wrong view, or is there something about that?
Well, think about it like this. Like right now, do you have the choice to flap your wings and fly away? Answer the question. Can you flap your wings and fly away right now? Can you choose to do that?
No, I don't have wings.
Exactly. So you cannot choose to flap your wings and fly away because you don't have any wings. Why do you not have any wings? Because you've not created the karma to have wings. So in that sense, your choices are conditioned. if you had in past lives made the necessary karma to have wings, then right now you would be able to choose whether or not to flap your wings and fly away. Because you do not have the karma of having wings, the result of that karma, then you don't have that choice available to you. So, in that sense, yes, our choices are to some degree limited by what choices we've made in the past. So you chose to come to the monastery right now. So that means that you can't choose to watch a movie. There's no movies to watch. Whereas if you're sitting at home in front of your TV with your beloved mom and your mom's like, do you want to watch a movie? Then that choice is available to you because you've created the conditions in which that choice is available. So in this sense, yes, our choices are conditioned in the sense that they're limited by what choices we've made in the past. But you always have choices in the present moment. And so often what we're doing is we're trying to steer the mind in the right direction. So sometimes that actually means you're faced with two choices, and neither one is absolutely perfect, but you pick the one that's better. You pick the lightest shade of gray that you can. And over time, that means you will have more and more light shades of gray available to you. And eventually, the path of purity becomes accessible. So that's actually what we've been doing for countless past lives. We've been choosing the lighter shade of gray until eventually here we are, human beings with access to the Dhamma. And now we can finally pick absolutely perfect, pure choices, which is delightful. So in this sense, yes, our choices are conditioned, but that does not negate the fact that we still make choices, and those choices still have karmic power. Does that make sense? Okay. And any other questions? Okay, good for now. So we'll go ahead and conclude the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll look at the second half of this discourse tomorrow. So we'll see you then.